Hello everyone and welcome back to another stream from Aman Talks NRL SuperCoach, here to preview round 26 head-to-head final week, the penultimate round for NRL SuperCoach. So a bit sad that we're getting towards the end, but still plenty to discuss. Hopefully you all can hear and see me okay. Praying for no internet issues like we had last week. Apologies again for that one, but look, my end is saying excellent connection, so we'll run and see how we go, although you never quite know in this household. But great to see so many of you already in the chat, which is awesome. Nick Solakis, Emmanuel Legend, thank you very much. Brayley, hello Tiger. Hey Tiger. Benny G, sexy airtime, got the tissues ready. That's probably going to flag me for being not kid appropriate, but thank you Benny G as always for your support. Aaron Miller, it's a wig. Yeah, shout out to number 5 in the overall. Shout out to number 5 in the Aman Talks group, he's renamed his team Aman's Wig. I can assure you it's not a wig, it's all natural, but I know my hair does seem to attract a lot of you out there, and I'm happy to give you some guidance where possible. Funnily enough, Art is already asking Aman, what's the hair routine? You know, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. I don't shampoo, conditioner too much. I have been swimming a lot more recently though, which has been good for my health. You know, it's been good fun. The weather's turning good as well, so yeah, I've been going to the aquatic center much more and swimming a lot more. That does mean I need to shampoo and conditioner a bit more frequently, otherwise gotta get the chlorine out of your hair. But generally don't shampoo conditioner too much. Leave-in conditioner is the trick. And yeah, just I don't mess around too much with like gels and sprays and stuff like that. I think it's all about keeping it natural, and your body will take care of the rest. Big wig Aman, they call them. Yep, absolutely. Fingers crossed, no issues. Yeah, look, we'll see how we go. I emailed you my team. Please have a look. Please help. Don't worry, Ian. We'll try to address your questions and stuff on the stream as well. Good evening, Aman from Teacup Sports. Samuel Morris in the grand final. Congrats. With only 16 playing. Yeah, look, obviously it's a bit of a tough week in terms of restings, mainly from the storm. So we'll definitely cover that. Davey K, hello. Love to see you in the chat. And Nathan Pup, Aman, time. Absolutely. So we'll get straight into things. Plenty to discuss. So quick update on my team. I've just been stuck at this like 3,000 rank for the last few weeks. I haven't really moved from there. Scored 1397. So I went down like 100 spots. I do have 3 trades and planning to use 2 this week. I do have Harry Grant who's been rested, and I don't have a backup hooker. So that's maybe one place I need to plug a gap. And then also I want to try to get in a guy who I think's got a high ceiling this week as well. Got to try to climb the ranks, and I think having these trades in the bank is ideally what I was going to use to get me up there. It hasn't quite panned out, and I think that's mainly because of sit starts. I must admit, I'm quite bad at the sit v starts. So look, I'll try to give my opinion on sit v starts where possible, but I haven't really got it right for my own team the last few weeks, and I do find I struggle. I'm having a good set of players to pick from and then having to choose which ones to sit. I just always find it never quite works out for me. So I don't mind having some depth, but then also having players rested, it just means the sit starts become a little bit easier. But that's currently where I'm at the moment with my team. I don't think I'm in any head-to-head finals, although I'm not really in many serious leagues and stuff. Maybe next year I'll do that. But like as Ian's saying here, you're in a head-to-head cash league, $1,600 for the winner, $400 for the runner-up. So obviously there's a $1,200 swing there. So for sure you'd want to be trying to be getting the win on that one. Look, I probably stress enough about SuperCoach as it is. The last thing I probably need is more stress from like cash leagues, and the stress just leads to bad for your hair. I'd be pulling my hair out. We can't have that. Absolutely not. From what I've learned this year and one of my big lessons from 2024, the hair has to stay. There can never be any situation where my hair is not looking good or not looking, luscious locks. So Civvy start is easy when you've only got 17. Absolutely. Davey K, you have 8 trades and 1 boost. That's a stitch up. Surely you don't have 8 trades. But Davey K, you better reach out to Tom Sangster and just ask him, hey, I've got 8 trades. I'll use 4 because I've got 4 left that I can use. Can you add on 4 for next season? I think just get in his ear and see if he can help you out in that aspect. But quickly to cover off, I guess, TLT, you're probably pretty familiar with what the lowdown was. But just to summarize, so of course, Melbourne Storm resting a bunch of their key players. So you've got restings for Harry Grant, Jerome Hughes, Eli Katoa. They're probably the main notable ones. You do have a bunch of other guys in there like Sean Blaw, Nelson, Asafa Solomona, I think Josh King from memory. Ryan Pappenhausen and Munster, though, are playing, but makes sense given that they've had limited games this season. Try to keep some minutes in their legs. That's obviously the biggest out, I think, from a Supercoach point of view, especially, these guys, Grant and Hughes, being in positions where you've only got one backup. At least with Katoa, you might have extra second row forwards that you can cover. Shout out to Joe Chan as well. He signed an extension with the Storm until 2028. He's just going to be an 80 nightmare for us for the next 4 years, but he's starting back rower this week. So if you need someone to cover the gap, look, Joe Chan could be the one for you this week. For the Dogs, so yeah, Stephen Crichton is out. That does probably have more positive benefits for someone like a Turbo and Manly, given how good Stephen Crichton is defensively for them. And that means Carraz has moved to centre, which obviously isn't as ideal, I think, for his scoring compared to being on the wing. And Josh Curran has been named on the bench, but still is in a bit of doubt. So he could be another one that, if he drops out of the team, a lot of us might have to just rely on playing some backup like Sam Hughes, Samuel Lafinu on the bye. For Penrith, no Casey McLean or Dane Laurie. Laurie was someone I was looking at. There was some chat about Dylan Edwards getting a rest and Laurie moving to fullback. If that was the case, I was really eyeing up Laurie, but that hasn't eventuated. And Casey McLean not named with Alamotti back in. Payne Haas has been listed in the reserves for the Broncos. Nico Hines is another big one. He's been named in the extended squad for the Sharks. I was listening to a little bit of 100% footy, and obviously Paul Gallen's very, very closely affiliated with the Sharks. He seemed to suggest that it was pretty much certain that Hines was going to play this week. So I think, obviously, there is a bit of a trick this week. If you're a Jerome Hughes owner who locks out first, the Sharks don't play, I think, until Friday. So you have to make that decision early. I guess the blessing is that you can sell Jerome Hughes for Hines, and then if Hines doesn't end up playing, you can pivot and go to a different halfback. But yeah, it seems to be that Hines will eventually play, but at the moment he's been named in the extended squad. But we'll definitely talk about him in a little bit more detail. Still no Ronaldo Mulatalo. Warriors not too relevant, but Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is out for them. That's the season over now as well, unfortunately. A big boost for mainly Greg Marzu. Bradman Best is back for the Knights, and I think that definitely boosts Marzu's scoring when Best is in the side. I haven't run the numbers on that, but I think that probably suggests that he's better with Bradman Best in the team. Kai Pearce-Paul is out. Very, very nasty leg injury. And Connor Watson is back via the bench for the Roosters. I just assumed when I saw Watson listed, I just assumed that he was listed in the starting team, but no, it turns out he's actually on the bench. So we'll talk about him as well, because hookers is obviously a big discussion this week with Harry Grant and Api Coruscant both being out for this week. Nathan Pup says, "Hey Martin, in my head-to-head grand final this week, me and my opponent almost have the same team. What are your pod tradings for this week to get the win? Thinking maybe To'o, Gagai." We'll absolutely talk about some more lower-owned players as well. But as Ian says, give the stream a like if you are enjoying it. So, the main things I wanted to cover off in today's stream is obviously people in head-to-head grand finals. You're looking at what are the best matchups for this week, any pods that you can look at that can give you the edge in your head-to-head, and also just even from an overall point of view, if you've got some trades to be able to bring in a more lower-owned player, just to try to shoot yourself up the rankings. So we'll definitely talk about all of that. I guess leading into what do you consider the best matchups for this week, but also somewhat for next week as well. Kind of looking at the ladder and seeing which teams are, like, this is a very common term used in more like the English Premier League, say in Fantasy Premier League, is looking at teams that are quote unquote on the beach. Basically just meaning they're kind of on holiday mode, their season's really over, they've got nothing to play for. They're generally not going to worry so much about what kind of performance. I mean, ideally, they'd probably say they want to put out a good performance, but realistically, your heart's probably not quite in it. So I think there's a few teams that this applies to, and obviously they're towards the bottom of the ladder. And these are the ones who feasibly have no chance of playing, I guess, top 8 footy. So you've got the Titans, you've got the Warriors, Rabbitohs, Eels, and the Tigers. The only motivation, I guess, for Eels Tigers will be in round 27 when they play each other, and that will be a battle for the who does not get the wooden spoon. So there'll be some, 1 foot in barley. That's the right, that's kind of more, that's the more like Aussie NRL terminology, I guess, for being on the beach, which is the more like English Premier League terminology. But 1 foot in barley. That's kind of, I guess, the saying there. So those are the teams I think you look at. Absolutely, if you've got teams versing up against them, and especially if they're teams who do have stuff to play for, those are the kind of teams that you want to be, prioritizing getting your players who are, versing the teams that don't really have much to play for. I've highlighted teams who could rest. So obviously we're seeing the Melbourne Storm this week, so I don't think we'll see big restings next week. I've got the Roosters here potentially for round 27. Let's just say hypothetically, if if they win, and let's say the Sharks lose this week versus the Warriors or something like that, maybe, the Roosters have got such a good points difference that they could still stay at second position, and so maybe they rest players next week, but I think that's more unlikely than likely. So I think we're not going to see too many restings. I just feel like there's still too much to play for at the bottom half of the 8. Even if teams are locked into the 8, they still want to prioritize maybe getting up higher in position, because I think, for example, you don't want, say in the Manly situation, if they lost this week versus the Bulldogs and the Dragons won, if the Dragons won again next week, and let's say Manly, lost again, then they'd be 8th all of a sudden, and then they'd be versing potentially the Bulldogs or maybe even the Panthers if they dropped into 5th. So I still think there's a lot to play for. So I think most teams are still pretty motivated. So my motivated teams, of course, I haven't got Melbourne in this list because they're pretty much wrapped up minor premiership. You got Sharks, Penrith, Bulldogs, Cowboys, Manly, Dragons, Broncos, Dolphins, Knights, Raiders. You could throw in the Roosters here as well as a motivated team. And yeah, good point, Ian, as well. Roosters do play the Rabbitohs in round 27, arch rivals. You'd expect them to still probably play a pretty good team. Now, to a lesser extent, I think the Raiders feature into this just because their points differential is quite bad. I struggle to see how they'll make the 8. Same with the Knights as well, but they could potentially make it depending on other results. But I do feel like the top 8, as it currently looks, is the top 8 that will finish the regular season. And then Broncos, Dolphins play each other this week. Whatever team loses this week is effectively out of the running. So they would be a target probably for next week. So I think this is all pretty obvious stuff, but I guess it's good to kind of remind us of like, okay, actually who are the teams that I know don't have much to play for? Therefore, when I look at the next 2 weeks, I know I'm picking a player from a team who's got a lot to play for versus opponents who don't have much to play for. So very simple way of looking at it, but I found it useful just to look into that again. So in terms of, I guess, looking at what are the best matchups for this week. So I'll start with more like broader team matchup stuff, and then we'll dig a little bit more into player stuff. Because this one of the most common questions I got on social media was, going through every position and just running through your best picks in each position. So that's kind of how I'm going to look to do it. So I've tried to order for this week who I consider to be having the best matchups. So I've got Penrith number 1. I think, Ivan Cleary was a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but, he did kind of say in his press conference after the game, what was the quote? I heard it on 100% Footy again. I was actually listening to it as I was walking home today. More or less about do they want to pay the price? I think that was the word he was using. Do they want to sacrifice enough to get back into being top 4, but also looking to try to go and win their 4th comp in a row? I think that loss against the Raiders last week, not embarrassing, but I think you can see Penrith coming back home, playing a very unmotivated Rabbitohs team. They seem to me they look the biggest candidate of team wanting to bounce back from a pretty poor performance last week, coming up against a team that I think they don't really have much to play for. So Penrith automatically is one that did stand out, and I think that, to me, that's probably the best matchup I think you could target this week, especially if you're looking for pods as well. Like To'o, he's had a few quiet weeks, but he does look like he's got a very favorable matchup here. You've got Sunia Turuva, I think, has been named back on the wing for the Panthers with no Dan Laurie. He was putting together some good scores. He scored a few tons this season. I would have to think that he's barely owned. Playing on the wing, I think that could actually be really, really fruitful. And the other thing with Penrith as well is that next week they also play at home, and I believe they play Canberra. So again, by this week's results, Canberra could also be another team that you look at as kind of more or less, 1 foot in barley. So Penrith to me really stand out with 2 really good games at home, both against almost unmotivated teams. Although it's hard to call a team unmotivated, but you kind of, I get what I mean. The next best matchup I highlighted for this week was Knights versus the Titans. So Knights playing at home against a very leaky Titans outfit. I think, especially from a Supercoach point of view, you saw how well the Roosters attacked that right-hand side defense for the Titans. I think you think of the Supercoach notable players from the Knights. It's Ponga, who loves playing his left-hand side. You got Bradman Best as a bit of a pod. And then you got Marzu, who's pretty well-owned as well. So, people were thinking of Dane Gagai this week, for example, as a bit of a pod. I do really like Gagai, but feels a bit like the left-hand side is what's going to benefit. But, of course, Gagai could still do very well. Sharks Warriors is another one. Sharks got a lot to play for. Good win for them on the weekend. Warriors don't have much to play for. They've got a bye next week. effectively this is their last game of the season. I think Sharks is a great option. So, people looking at Nico Hines, I think that's a really good trade-in target. I'll speak a bit more specifically about Hines in a little bit. I do have some doubts about how well he can bounce back on. And that's mainly, I may as well mention it now, since we're talking about it being such a good game on paper. My concern is that I think he's obviously been out for a few weeks, and it was a leg injury. So performance-wise, how well do we think he's going to go? I would also think that if Hines comes in, it would be at the expense of Daniel Atkinson. And, prior to Hines' injury, a lot of us were debating, Hines with Trindle, he's fine, but he's not like that 120, 130 plus guy that we were seeing kind of midway through the season when Trindle's out. So part of me does think that, yes, Hines is a really, really big pod. No one basically owns him. And it's a great matchup. But if Trindle's still in the team, is Hines actually that 120, 130 plus ceiling guy that we think he is? He well could be, because it's a really, really good matchup. But, there are other guys in my head who I think I would bank on potentially even outscoring Hines this week. So I completely understand why Hines would be one of the most traded in players this week, but part of me has got a little bit of a lingering doubt. But I still definitely like Sharks players like Kale Iro, Britton Nikora have been awesome in the last few weeks. If you're looking for some serious pods, no Mulatalo, someone like a Samuel Stone Street, he could also be an option on the wing there too. So I think Sharks is also not a bad place to be pod hunting. I believe Jesse Raymond is suspended for this week. He would have been one I think would have been a really good option to go for as well. But of course, he's not there. Although I believe Sione Katoa could be named for the Sharks. Sione Katoa has been named. So Steve Vitalik, there's a couple of guys there who potentially could have some big ceilings this week for the Sharks. And what I've also got on screen is PPM conceded in the last 5 rounds, and it's broken down by each position. If you look at the Warriors, they don't have any, apart from the dummy half, there's no areas where they're like a specific weakness, but you can see a lot of backline players, like, for example, second row halfback, 5'8", and fullback are generally not too bad. That suggests to me that it's the edges that are generally performing quite well for the opposing team. So, a lot of those players playing on the edge could do very well for the Sharks this week. Next up, I had Roosters versus Canberra. So I think, Canberra, they are capable of having good days where they play very well. Like we saw that against Penrith last week. But Roosters are just so hot at the moment in terms of their attack. I think that's still at home a great matchup that I'd be looking to target. They're pretty highly owned, the Roosters, so there's not too many pods, I guess you could get from there. The big one that stands out probably is Dan Tupou. Scored 122 on the weekend. I believe he's now got like a 5-round average of 73. It could even be higher than that, to be honest. Because prior to the 122, he had a 55, 75, 79, 56, 63. But he's had a 99. He's had 108. Like, he really benefited from how weak the Titans' defense was on his edge. Canberra, it could be the same as well. And I think Canberra, good through the middle, but sometimes on their edges can be quite susceptible. So I think Roosters, again, a great place to look for a pod. And my pod would be Dan Tupou. Otherwise, Dom Young, Sam Walker, Angus, Teddy, still all the notable candidates. Finally, rounding out, I think the 2 best next matchups would be the Broncos versus the Dolphins. So Broncos are probably not super relevant from a Supercoach point of view now. I guess we have to talk about Adam Reynolds very briefly. He absolutely killed it last week, scored over 120. Again, so if you're looking for a serious pod in your halfback, he could maybe be an option against the Dolphins, who, this is effectively a shootout for staying in the race for the top 8. And then finally, I've got Dragons versus Parramatta. The big one that stands out here to me is like Zach Lomax. So Parramatta are very, very weak, especially to opposing right wingers. If you look at the stats here, Parramatta are the 3rd worst at defending opposition centers over the last 5 rounds. And I'm pretty sure over the season, I think they're 1st or 4th, one of the 2, but they're definitely up there. And so they've just had a tendency to concede so many tries to opposing right wingers. Zach Lomax, who scored 73 on the weekend without any attacking stats, went 95 before that against the Titans. He automatically stands out as someone I think, playing for a motivated team. Great matchup this week for a team who doesn't really have much to play for. And then next week they play, I think the Dragons play the Raiders in the final round. So by then the Raiders could be out of the running for anything, and so it could be another good matchup for the Dragons. I think I also misspoke earlier because I mentioned that Penrith play the Canberra Raiders in round 27. The correction I think is that Penrith play the Titans. So again, speaking about some of those Penrith guys from earlier, it's actually the Titans that they come up against in round 27. So those are kind of the teams that I've looked at for this week that really stand out to me. And I think they're ones that have 2 consecutive good matchups. Penrith for sure, Rabbitohs and Titans at home. Newcastle have got the Titans and the Dolphins at home the next 2 weeks. Sharks probably less so next week because they versus Manly, but Warriors this week at home is really good. Roosters, Canberra and Rabbitohs really, really, really good. And then I think Dragons with Parramatta and Canberra. To me, those are the teams I think good for this week, but also could be really good for next week as well. So I'll quickly pause there. There's a couple of comments coming in here saying that Cam Murray was unsuccessful at the judiciary. Does that mean that Keon Koloamatangi starts at lock? I would suspect that, yeah, if Murray's out, then Koloamatangi is going to be playing at lock. Again, this could be another good reason for targeting Penrith players. Murray obviously is really, really important for that team. Him not being there is going to hurt them a lot. So again, to me, that probably adds a bit more reasoning to want to maybe targeting some Penrith players. So in terms of who then are the best individual players, I think to be picking, and I'll kind of summarize this as well into like a best 17 across every position. For me, Lomax I think really stands out. Just he's been so consistent this season. Goal kicking, scored very well against the Sharks with no attacking stats. Prior to that, 95 and 81 against the Titans and the Dogs. He's just been killing it, and he has got a ceiling. He's got 3 tons already this season, and one of them was 170. I can see him easily scoring 1 or 2 tries this week and easily cracking 120, 130. So I really like Zach Lomax as a target for this week. He's probably up there as my number 1. I'm probably going to be trading him in this week as well. I've got 2 trades that I can use this week. I think the matchup and the thing is, even if he gets no attacking stats, he's still good for a 70 to 75. So I think from a head-to-head point of view, he's not necessarily a pod, but he's one of those guys, I've listed him here, I've called it must-have. To me, this is kind of the territory of players of like, if you're in a head-to-head final and you're coming up against a guy who's got this guy and you don't, it's almost like a situation where I'd be trying to cancel them out if I could and see if you can get an advantage elsewhere. So Zach Lomax for me is up there. Teddy is pretty obvious. I've got Ponga in here. Now, a lot of you will be running Teddy and Turbo, and I think, I put it out there on Twitter with a little bit of, maybe it was little bit of a hot take, but I basically said if you have trades, the luxury of all luxury trades is doing Turbo to Ponga, because Turbo's got Bulldogs away and then he's got the Sharks, compared to Ponga, who's got 2 home games versus the Titans and the Dolphins. For sure, draw-wise, I definitely prefer Ponga. Ponga could be the best captain this week or next week. And fair enough, a lot of people did rightly point out that, with Stephen Crichton being suspended, the Dogs' defense does weaken. I've got some charts a little bit later as well about try-scoring maps, and the Dogs are a little bit weak on their edges at times as well. So, look, I completely understand, if you are running Teddy and Turbo, you probably don't want to be trading Turbo out, just given how good he's been going. But again, this is probably one of those things where, if you're really trying to chance and win your head-to-head and you've got no other place to try to, beat your opponent, taking a flyer on someone like Ponga goal kicking versus the Titans, who, conceded 130 to Teddy last week. The Bulldogs have been very sound defensively. Crichton is a big miss, and I think their edge is going to be a little bit weaker because you're going to have Karaz and I believe Skelton playing on a wing. That does scare me a little bit as a non-Turbo owner. Turbo can easily still rack up like 100 and 110 points. If you're probably arguing probabilities of a ceiling, though, I'd probably say KP's got a better chance of going 130, 40 plus than maybe Turbo this week. Could be famous last words. Next up, I've got Nikora and Iro. I feel like with these 2 guys, they've just been on such a good tear. If Hines is back, that's probably only better for Nikora playing on that right-hand side. So I think these 2 guys are also guys I'd be like hoping to try to get into your team and cancel out your opposition. Very similar with Angus Crichton and Sam Walker. Maybe Sam Walker to a lesser degree because you could anti-pod him with maybe like a Hines this week. But Angus, without Eli Katoa, for example, this week, if you're in a must-win head-to-head, you don't have Angus, you've got Eli Katoa. Just see if you can do Eli Katoa to Angus, in my opinion. Also got the Roosters backline players in, Dom Young, Manu, and Tupou. I would ideally be trying to have, obviously, at least one. I'm going to assume that most people have got Dom Young. This is a good place to maybe pot up a little bit because I don't think Manu is that heavily owned just because he only came back from injury not that long ago. So he could be someone who is not very highly owned still. Tupou is definitely a big pod. And, these are 2 guys that you could look to target who not many people own, and they could, I think the Raiders, they seem to be a bit weaker on the edges, and I think that's probably better for the Roosters, maybe compared to what Penrith were able to deliver. So yeah, Manu at the moment, he's only owned in 15% of coaches. Now that's all teams, so it could be a little bit different if you look at upper ranks. In comparison, Dan Tupou is only owned by 3% of teams, so he's definitely a much bigger pod. So I think I'd probably lean towards getting maybe Tupou over Manu if you're looking for a pod. The nice to haves that I've got, so To'o or Tungo. So again, this is leaning into a little bit that Penrith matchup. I've also got Dylan Edwards and Jerome Luai there. Now with Alamotti being named, I wonder what's going to happen in terms of the goal kicking for Penrith, because Alamotti was kicking goals for a period as well. If Dylan Edwards is goal kicking, then I think obviously he looks like a really enticing pod. But I think to me that I would still take Teddy, Ponga and Turbo this week ahead of Edwards. Jerome Luai is also featuring there for Penrith. For Knights, I think you've got Marzu, Gagai. I'd probably add Bradman Best here as a bit of a pod as well. I would actually rank them, given that I've ranked the Knights as second best matchup for this week. I'd probably rank Lomax number 1. Number 2 for like center wing trade-ins this week for pods. I think I'd still probably just about, I probably would just about lean the Knights players. So maybe a Marzu or a Bradman Best. So I'd probably be going Lomax number 1, Marzu, Bradman Best in the second. Third, I'd probably be looking at your Roosters players still. So I'd be looking at the likes of a Dom Young, Manu, Dan Tupou. Fourth, probably looking at your Sharks players. So yeah, probably looking at the likes of an Iro, maybe a Sam Stone Street as a big differential. Maybe a Sione Katoa on the right wing. And then probably rounding it out with maybe I forgot to add the Penrith guys. Sorry. I'd probably chuck the Penrith guys, I think, after the Knights players. So I'd probably go Lomax, your Knights center wings, your Penrith guys, then your Roosters guys, and then maybe your Sharks. That's kind of like my ordering of like if you're trying to rank pods, and more probably in your center wing. That's probably how I'd go about it. A little bit of statistical stuff, I guess, involved in that as well. So, for example, if you look at the Titans, they've actually been not too bad at defending opposition centers, but I think we saw last week, that's probably more of the information I'd be wanting to look at rather than the last 5 weeks, because now you are getting to the point where in the last 3 rounds, teams do start kind of, 1 foot in barley and all that good stuff. Some other pods, I do still like Jaden Campbell this week, goal kicking against the Knights. We've talked a little bit about Nico Hines already. Matt Burton, I think I've got him on the list here, but I probably would rank him below. If you're trading in a half this week, for sure I still prefer Sam Walker or even taking a punt on Nico Hines. I just think that matchup against Manly, it could be a little bit cagey. There's a lot riding on that game. Both of these guys in the bottom half of the top 8. So Burton, he was good last week, but I feel like this week could be a little bit different. And then I've got Jacob Little, who he probably is the best hooker, I think, to replace Harry Grant or Api Coruscant. We'll dig into the hook stats in a little bit more detail later, but if you look at who Jacob Little is versing the next 2 rounds, so you've got this week, you've got Parramatta. They're ranked 5th for conceding points to opposition hookers in the last 5 rounds. And then if you look to round 27 against the Raiders, they've been 11th. And I think collectively he actually has the best statistical draw on paper for any hooker for the final 2 rounds. So Jacob Little, who's been on an absolute tear, I think he could also be he'd be definitely a nice pod as well, because he's very, very low owned at the moment. Also, I skipped over in the must-haves. I think you definitely need to have in your front row, especially when you've got the likes of a Curran and a Fainu potentially. Fainu definitely out. Curran could be a bit of a doubt. I think you probably do need to have one good, strong front row in Tarpany or Fanua Blake. This week, I would maybe slightly just about give the edge to Fanua Blake, just coming up against his future club. I think against the Roosters, I can see Fanua Blake more likely getting about 80 plus than maybe I would Tarpany. But Tarpany's been on a really good tear in the last few weeks as well. So quickly wrapping, I guess, all of that, what would be my ideal kind of 17 for this week? So this is kind of more what I'm going to run through position by position. So if you look at hooker, I think Little for me is number 1. So, he's gone under the radar for so long, and, it's on people like myself to be highlighting these guys to help you guys, but obviously missed him. But like if you look at his score since round 10, which is when he really started playing 80 minutes, 45 in his first game, but then it was 102, 52, 69, 63, 90, 70, 75, 72, 60, 65, 93. Like, he's been absolutely killing it. And I think with two really good and he's got 73 in the weekend as well. Two really nice matchups, I think, coming up, especially for hookers. He's my number one replacement at dummy half. And I think if you're building your ideal 17 for this week, he would be my hooker. If Connor Watson was starting, he'd probably be number 2 for me, but he's been named on the bench. So I've kind of defaulted to Reece Robson. Just because, with Robson, you know he's playing 80 minutes. Melbourne have named a weaker team. So at least that is somewhat in his favour for this week playing at home. Front row, look, to me, the best two, Tarpany and AFB. I'd probably slightly switch that ordering now that I've said it. I'd probably put AFB number 1 and then Tarpany number 2. In second row, I think Angus for me is number 1. I think we saw his huge ceiling last week, scoring a hat-trick. Fafita is still in my top 3, just because I know last week was a down game, but it's against the Knights. I still think there could be some attacking stats on offer for Fafita. And Britt Nicker are definitely in my top 3 as well. I think it's a really good matchup at home against the Warriors. And then my fourth that I've got is Isaiah Yeo. So he scored 100 plus last week. As I said, really good matchup against the Rabbitohs. He maybe is potentially a candidate for a rest, but I kind of feel like with Penrith just needing to win games, Yeo could be someone who I still think plays good minutes. And we saw on the weekend, we've seen all season long, he can get these attacking stats. And, he's averaged like 72, I think, for the entire season. He's just never going to get you anything lower than 55, more likely going to get you a 70 to 80. So I think he's a bit of a pod as well. I don't think many people own in second row. So for example, you got Eli Katoa looking to make a move. You could go Eli Katoa to Isaiah Yeo with a really good matchup on paper this week, and he could be a little bit of a pod for you for your head-to-head finals. Olukwatu doesn't feature, I would play all of these guys above Olukwatu this week, just because Olukwatu has got the Bulldogs, who are very good defensively. Look, I'll probably still be playing Olukwatu in my own team this week. It probably does help a little bit that Stephen Crichton has been ruled out for this game through suspension. Halfback, I think for me, still Sam Walker number 1 for this week and probably the next 2 weeks. Hines would be second for me if he is named to start, just because I think the matchup is that good. 5'8", leaning a little bit more into Penrith. For me, it's Luai, and then it's Matt Burton, then it's Jaden Campbell as a bit of a pod. Centre wing, I've kind of spoken through this already, but so what I'd probably change a little bit from this compared to what I spoke about. So Lomax for me, yep, he is number 1. The Penrith guys do come in at second, and I'd probably still lean To'o instead of like an Isaac Tungo. I actually don't even mind taking a flyer on Sunia Turuva. So quickly looking at Turuva stats. So let's just bear with me for a second. So Sunia Turuva, Turuva through the season has averaged 59, but he's had 2 games where he scored over 100, and he's had a 93 in there and like another 89. And the last time he played the Rabbitohs, he scored 89 points. I think Turuva, he's 490k, like he's just a complete throw something in the wall, see if it sticks type thing. But I think he's a really good shout as well as a bit of a pod. DC and Munster. So the reason I haven't got DC and Munster, so look, maybe it's a bit of oversight, but with DCE, I think Bulldogs is just, despite obviously having no Stephen Crichton, they're just still a very good defense. I definitely prefer Sam Walker or Nico Hines above him. With Munster, you probably could make an argument that he could maybe be filling in into number 2 or number 3 position here. But I think he's just been a little bit quiet, and I think that is partly just due to him not being 100%. There's obviously going to be more onus on him this week, given that a lot of those other star players aren't there. But I don't know. I feel like for me, Munster just doesn't feel like a relevant Supercoach option so far this year. And I think that's just because he's obviously still dealing with something with his hip. I think someone like a Burton or a Campbell who are fully healthy, I probably would take Campbell over Munster. Just the fact that he's goal kicking. Campbell last week scored 58 points against the Roosters in a very, very well-beaten team. And he, apart from that, there was a try that he did score, but it was called back for an obstruction. Look, if he scored that, he's got a line break try, and instead of 58, we're probably looking at something closer to, 58 plus almost 30. We're looking at like an 85. Munster, to me, hasn't really suggested that he'll get close to that. So I would actually take a goal-kicking Campbell against the Knights, because I think playing away without a lot of his star-studded buddies at Melbourne, Cowboys away, Cowboys are also a motivated team. They need to keep winning. And I think Cowboys have been a little bit better in the last few weeks. So yeah, I probably would rank Munster a little bit behind someone like a Jaden Campbell. Yes, he'll get all the ball, but also I think that might just mean he's a little bit of a magnet as well. So I'm not sure if that bodes well for him. Tom Dearden, good 3-round average. Yeah, Dearden is potentially a shout as well, but again, I'm looking at Melbourne under strength. It's still Melbourne, and I just can't see them being as I would still take that under strength Melbourne team as more difficult of opponent as this Rabbitohs without Cam Murray right now. The Rabbitohs just don't have much to play for. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on the Rabbitohs, but that's just kind of my gut feel. And so Dearden, I think, has been great, but he does also have a slightly tougher game next week as well. I believe it is it's the Dogs that the Cowboys play in round 27. Yeah, they play the Dogs and it's away. So look, for this week, even for this week standalone, look, I know Luai was really poor last week and only scored 24 points, but I've got to take a chance that the Penrith Panthers bounce back and Luai will be part of that. If you actually look at the numbers against for the Rabbitohs, they've conceded a lot of points to opposition halfbacks as well. So kind of looking at it as a game that could suit Luai for this week. So yeah, I'm looking at it more from the matchup point of view. I think Rabbitohs is a better target than under strength Melbourne. Is Pappy goal kicking? Good point, actually. Let's have a quick look at team list. So yeah, just reminding myself. Yeah, so no Nick Meaney. So Nick Meaney hasn't been named. So yeah, actually, good point. Pappy, looking at the team lists, he's the most likely player on this team sheet to be goal kicking. So it's probably a good chance that Pappy is goal kicking. So again, he's probably maybe another pod that you can throw into your fullback rotation here. He did score over 100 plus last week as well. Center wing, yeah, so again, just going quickly at center wing. So I've got Lomax and then I've got Penrith guys, so To'o Tungo Taruva. I'm going to swap I think, what did I say? Did I say the Roosters or the Knights? Roosters, Knights are very, very close to each other, but I'll probably put maybe the likes of a Gagai and Marzu just with good ceiling against the Titans. Then you've got your Roosters players. Then you've got your Sharks players like Iro, Sam Stone Street. And then I do have Val Holmes here because I think Val Holmes goal kicking against, it is an understrength Storm team and he's been really, really good in the last few weeks as well. It's kind of how I'd be ranking my order list for centers. For fullback, Teddy versus Ponga as the number one is a bit tough for this week. I'm kind of still looking at Teddy just because he's been so good all season long. Roosters' attack is definitely better than the Knights' attack. So I'm thinking Teddy first. I would definitely take Ponga over Turbo this week, just in a pure one-on-one this week, but famous last words, Turbo could still smash 130 points against me and then I'm looking like an idiot. And then I've got Dylan Edwards here, but it could also be Pappy. It's a difficult with Pappy, even if he's goal kicking, that's enticing, but I would still take Teddy, Ponga and Turbo, I think, above Pappy for this week. Val playing his 200th game, says Sam, and that's a good point as well. Yeah, if he's playing his 200th game, then obviously there's a bit more extra motivation there as well. And is this his last home game for the Cowboys as well? Because I can't fully remember how the whole final system works in my head with home games and stuff, but it's definitely his last home game before he goes to the Dragons for the regular season. So look, again, building narratives, could be some potential there for Val. I've quickly took a screen grab here of the top trade-ins just because I thought it might be good just to touch on this. We've spoken about pretty much all of these guys except maybe Angus in detail, but I've ranked Angus as my number one second row. So I didn't really have too much, I think, to talk about on the top 10 most trade-ins. I've already said Little, I think, is the most sensible replacement for a hooker this week. I'd probably just about rank Nicho Hynes maybe above Matt Burton just to take the chance on the matchup. I think the matchup is definitely better than Bulldogs versus Manly. Otherwise, if you don't have Sam Walker, to be honest, I'd actually rank him first above both Matt Burton and Nicho Hynes. In terms of centers, Lomax is the most traded in center this week. I think I agree with that. Azayo's second behind Angus. Makes sense. I assume most people already have Fafita and Nickera. Reece Robson, second most popular hooker replacement. I agree with that as well, and I'll talk about the hookers in a little bit just now. A lot of people bring in Val, probably looking at his 3-round average and just thinking, under strength Melbourne, I'm going to get him in. So don't mind that. And yeah, Tarpany's been killing it recently as well. So there's no major issues, I guess, with the top 10. I'd maybe just reorder some things like with my halves. I'd probably go Sam Walker, Nicho, Burton, kind of in that order. Probably wanted to spend a little bit of time as well looking at center wing targets. Now, we've spoken about a lot of these guys in detail, but this kind of this is one of the reasons why I'm very, very keen on Lomax as one of the best trade-ins for this week. So I can't remember the website that this is from. Actually, no, I can. It's from statsinsider.com.au. So shout out to you. Thank you for having this very useful data. But basically, it's a try-scoring heat map for every team. And apologies if it's a little bit small on your screen. Hopefully, you can zoom in on your side of things. But on the left-hand side, it shows where teams score in terms of their left edge, right edge, and the middle. And then on the other side, you've got where teams concede on their left, right edge, and middle. So I've just pointed out a few things. I just pulled out a few things that I thought might be worthwhile raising. So the first thing that stood out, so Dragons, 49% of their tries are scored on the right edge. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, given that that's where Lomax is. Ben Hunt plays on that side as well. And if you look at where the Parramatta Eels concede most of their tries, so they concede 45% of their tries down the left edge. Granted, they concede 43% on the other side as well. Basically, that tells you that the Eels' edges are very, very weak. And so you're coming up against a Dragons team who prioritize their right-hand side against an Eels team who concede the most on their right edge. Sorry, they concede the most on their left edge defense, which is where Lomax runs up against. It all kind of matches up, I think, for Lomax to have a really good matchup for this week. Other things I wanted to point out as well. So Dogs, so they actually concede 46% they score 46% of their tries on their right-hand side, which is the side of, say, a Kurias, but they concede also 50% of their tries on their right edge. So if you think about that, that would be Manly's left edge attacking. So left edge attacking for Manly, there's only one person who dominates that. That's Turbo. So I can easily see Turbo still doing very well in this game because Bulldogs do have a bit of a weakness on that particular side of the field. So one to monitor. You combine that with the fact that the other side will have Karaz and Skelton. Look, people were raising it with me as well on Twitter, but I can completely understand why people maybe don't want to be selling the likes of a Turbo. And because I think there are some things with the matchup, despite the Bulldogs being a great defense this season, no Stephen Crichton, some of these numbers do suggest that edge for them is a little bit weak at times. Turbo can still do very well. A couple of other things I wanted to point out. So Panthers surprisingly have it's not surprising, but Panthers have conceded 56% of their tries on their right edge. That's the edge that has had Isaac Tungo all season and Taruva. They've just been pretty leaky. So again, thinking of the opponents, Rabbitohs have conceded 49% of their tries they've scored 49% of their tries on the left. I think if this was early in the season, you might consider maybe some Rabbitohs left edge players, but I think at this point, you're probably not looking to do so. So some of this stuff was useful for looking at more particularly the Lomax versus the Parramatta Eels. We'll quickly talk a little bit about some of those other guys that we spoke about. So, and this is me coming off the fly now. So let's look at the scoring for the Knights. So the Knights can score 40% of their tries on the left-hand side. So that's their made side. And so that makes sense. In terms of where the Titans concede their tries, pretty even across the park. So it doesn't actually really matter where they're defending. They just have an even spread of middle, right, although there is a slight tendency for them to concede tries on their right edge defense, which would be the left-hand side attack for the Knights. So again, building a bit of a narrative, but there's a few things that make me think that it's a really good matchup for the Knights and their left-hand side attack. Other guys that we spoke about the Roosters. So Roosters attack, pretty even, 45% of their tries surprisingly scored on the left-hand side. That would be because of not just Dan Tupou, but Angus Crichton has scored a lot of tries this season, 41% on their right wing. So most of the Roosters tries are scored on the edges. Let's look at where Canberra can see their tries. Pretty even as well. So 41% and 40% for both edges, 18% in the middle. The 18% in the middle is pretty low though. So it does show that the Raiders have got a tendency to concede tries on both of their edges. Again, it makes me think that this is a good matchup for your Roosters outside backs. We also spoke a little bit about Val Holmes. So Cowboys, where are they here? Cowboys, again, pretty even. Most of their tries are scored on the edges, 43% on the left, 44% on the right. In terms of where Melbourne are ranking, so the Storm concede most of their tries on their left-hand edge defense, which would be the right-hand side Cowboys attack. So again, if you're looking for, so that's not Val Holmes' side, that's the right-hand side. So that makes me think your guys like Carl Felt, Scott Drinkwater comes to mind maybe as a little bit of a rogue pod at fullback as well, because he does generally like playing that right hand side. Could also be a matchup that you could maybe look into exploiting. The other guys that we spoke about at centre wing, I'm mainly looking at centre wing because I know that's where a lot of the activity is this week. Kale Iro. So let's look at the Sharks. Yeah, so most of the Sharks tries have been scored on the left-hand side, 43%, and the Warriors have conceded most of their tries pretty evenly on the edges, 42% on their right-hand side, 43% on their left. So again, suggests that edges for the Sharks will do well because the Warriors have conceded most of their points on the edge. So yeah, it all looks really good for your Sharks outside backs. So I won't go through much more than that. There's obviously, I could pick apart every single matchup possible, but that will be here forever. But yeah, a few notable things to point out there. So it might just be worth you, if you are looking for pods, just going through this and seeing if there's any trends that you notice about certain teams and where they concede, and if that matches up with teams and where they attack. Because that might just be a nice way for you to find out who are the pods that you should be targeting in certain positions. Very quickly looking at hookers, because I know that they are a more popular trade area for this week. So I've looked at the draw rankings for hookers for the last 2 rounds, and Jacob Little does come out on top. So he's got a collective score of 16 because he's got a really good matchup on paper for dummy halves this week, and then a not so difficult one next week. So I think Jacob Little is the obvious trade-in replacement for a Harry Grant or an Appy Coruscant. Now, I'll get onto my own trade thoughts later, but I am looking at someone like a Reece Robson because he's at a pretty good price. He's 521k. I can trade Grant to Robson this week, and that gives me enough money to get Lomax in this week. So that's very tempting for all the reasons I've mentioned why Lomax is so good. Good thing with Robson is that while the Storm are one of the best teams at defending opposition dummy halves, it's an understrength Storm this week. So at least that number on paper looks scary, but in actuality might not be too bad. And then while Robson versus the Bulldogs next week, surprisingly, they've over the last 5 rounds have been actually ranking quite highly in terms of conceding points to opposition dummy halves. So it could potentially be a good matchup for Robson. The worst case is that Robson, he's an 80-minute hooker. He's safe generally for like a 50-60. So he's not the worst thing in the world. So I'm probably, hooker's a bit of a low upside position, although Grant did get 129 last week. But it's kind of like the trade of Grant to Robson frees me enough money to get someone like a Lomax. And I feel like the difference between Robson and Little, it might only be 10-15 points, but that can let me get a center wing upgrade that could be potentially 50 points more. Why am I going back on your work on Watson? I've heard on the grapevine you wanted Watson. Yeah, I originally did want Connor Watson, and to be honest, I just saw that he was named and I thought, sweet, trading him in. Then I only realized later that he was named on the bench. And I thought, well, if he's named on the bench, then I don't really want Connor Watson. So that's the reason why I've backtracked a little bit on Connor Watson. Little would be my preferred, but he's 673k. Grant to him doesn't really give me the money that I need to try to make that upgrade to get to Lomax, which is kind of why I'm looking at instead getting like a Reece Robson. If Connor Watson was starting, I think I'd probably be going him just to capitalize a little bit more on the Roosters. The safe thing as well with a Reece Robson is that you know that he's probably not going to get a rest. They've just had a bye last week. They're in the top 8. They need to keep winning games. So at least with Reece Robson, you know that he's a guarantee to play the next 2 weeks. Fingers crossed, pending he doesn't get any injury. But yeah, that's what I'm looking at the moment. I think in terms of ownership, Little and Robson are pretty low owned as well. So I think if you've got the trade flexibility, you can get a guy who's pretty low owned at hooker as well. Let's see. Any questions on hooker? Probably not too many. Blake says Lomax is going for a hat trick, and I'm an Eels fan, mate. This is the reason why I need to be trying to get in Lomax for my own team this week. Let's take a look at captaincy as well. I'm just flying through things as well because it's been about 50 minutes already. Swift AU who's asking what are some good second row forwards for round 27. Look, I think for next week, it still boils down to, I think, a lot of the similar players. So I'm looking at still Penrith, Roosters, probably the Sharks, still looking at the Knights to an extent. So Isaiah Yeo stands out, Angus Crichton stands out, Britton Nickera stands out. They're probably the main ones that, come to mind straight away as guys who I think have good matchups in the both remaining weeks. So in terms of captaincy for this week, I think, again, you can go pretty left field. So Ian Johnson's here is saying Lomax, VC, Ponga, captain thoughts. So I think quickly on the VCs, it's going to be another one of those weeks where, the three main fullbacks, Turbo, Teddy, Ponga, they're all viable captaincy candidates, but you can only give it to one of them. So I guess the question is, who do you put it on? Now, a lot of people are probably going to still stick strong with Turbo, and you can't knock it based on his form. Currently, he's 30% captained in the top 5% of coaches. Teddy is still number one at 43%, and Pong is third at 12%. So I think if you're looking to try to gain a differential in your head-to-head, or you're trying to chase rank, Ponga, I've got away to the Titans. It's actually a home game for Ponga, so that should actually be Gold Coast at home. Ponga's probably the guy I'd be leaning towards if you are looking to go for someone who you think is high upside. He's a guarantee. He's a gun, but he's just not going to be as highly captained as the other two. So KP really stands out to me as a very attractive option. And the Titans have ranked pretty poor over the season for conceding points to opposition fullbacks. So Ponga to me really does stand out. At the moment, I've got my armband still on Tedesco, so I own Turbo and Ponga. I own Teddy and Ponga for reference. I'm still on Teddy at the moment just because he's just been so consistent, so safe. And the Roosters, I just feel like with comfort, will easily put on 30 points. You just never quite know, I guess, with Newcastle. And looking at those stats a little bit earlier about Canberra and conceding points on their edges, you just know that Teddy is going to be involved on both sides of the field. He'll contribute on the left, he'll contribute on the right. So the potential for him to get those try assists, line break assists. And then even last week against the Titans, he was just getting so many free, easy tackle busts. Teddy still really sticks out to me. So I think the safe option is Teddy. The more higher risk, higher potential reward is Ponga. On Turbo, look, obviously I don't own him, so it's a little bit of a different question. But I think if I did own Turbo or Teddy, I would probably think about putting it on Teddy instead. If you own Turbo and Ponga, I'd maybe chance at putting it on Ponga, but I completely understand why, if you're high up in the rankings and you want to play a little bit safe, Teddy's probably the guy. Otherwise, it probably is Turbo, just because you're trying to protect against the ownership of him as well. Other pod options, so Lomax. So if, I've been harping on about Lomax all stream, but if you look at Parramatta, the last 5 rounds, they've been the third worst at defending points to opposition centre wing. If you look at the entire season, they're actually the worst. So really, really good matchup for Lomax. I think if you're able to go VC Lomax and maybe captain into one of your fullbacks, to me, that probably feels like the nice play that you can do. You just have to make sure that you can obviously do the vice captain loophole. But I do really like Lomax with a VC this week. The more pod option, Luai. I can understand why this is a little bit more risky because he only had a really low score last week. But when you're VCing, if you obviously cop a low score from your vice captain, you obviously just don't do the loop. So you're not really losing too much. So I think, again, if you're trying to go a little bit puntier, a little bit more lower owned, Luai probably stands out to me. I think Luai and Lomax to a lesser degree probably stand out because the most popular VC at the moment is actually Val Holmes. Val Holmes is 21% VC'd by the top 5% of super coaches. So I think, look, Holmes is fine against Melbourne, but it is against an understrength Melbourne team. But it's still Melbourne. I feel like I'm happy to maybe swerve off a Holmes VC. At the moment in my own team, I'm looking at Luai, who I did bring in last week in the end. So I'm looking at Luai or I'm looking at Lomax and then probably going into one of my fullbacks. If you do bring in Hines, the ultimate pod play would obviously be to captain, but I do feel that's a little bit risky just because he's coming back from quite a lengthy layoff. AJ29 saying VC Birdo and Captain Teddy or VC Luai Captain Teddy. I think I'd take Luai, to be honest. I think I just prefer the matchup. VC Lomax Captain Teddy, I think that's a really, really great combination. Then I think if you can do that, then yeah, I'd be pretty content with that as your combo of VC and C. Brian, To'o, Lomax, both have great matchups this week. Yeah, To'o we've spoken a little bit about. Personally, I guess the other thing we didn't mention with them is you just don't quite know what edge the Penrith wing is going to be playing because they do shift it around a bit. To'o's been on the left wing and he hasn't really been getting that much ball. It seems to be the right wing, which is why I think I'd maybe think about going to Ruva instead of To'o this week if you're purely looking for just this week as a trade-in option. Obviously, To'o's got better base power, but the right wing is where they've been scoring most of their tries compared to the left wing. So that's a little bit on captaincy. So that's kind of all I really wanted to cover. I'll just quickly go through my own team. So while I get that up, please do give the stream a like if you have been enjoying it, guys. All right, give me a second. All right, you should be able to see my team now at the moment. So the way I'm currently looking with my own squad, I've got 3 trades in the bank. I was originally eyeing up Dane Laurie, but he's obviously not an option now, not been named this week. At the moment, I've got Luai as my VC and captaincy on Tedesco. Obviously, no Casey McLean as well. I know Dillbags has got the Dragons, but I think the Dragons, obviously they're pretty good at the moment. I think Dillbags playing on the right hand side doesn't seem to be having as much of a Supercoach relevant game as I'm hoping, so I probably will sit Dillbags this week. Definitely playing Angus, Nikora, and Fafita. I'm probably going to be playing Oluquatu, I think, as well. I think just without Stephen Crichton on the edge that Oluquatu is running at, I think Oluquatu, he looked a little bit better last week after a couple of quiet weeks. And at the moment, I'm playing Josh Curran and Tarpany. If Curran's ruled out, I think I'm just going to sub in Sam Hughes, because Sam Hughes scored 48 last week. If he can knock that out again, I'll take it. My biggest pain point in my team at the moment for this week is that I don't have a dummy half. So Jake Simpkin, who I got ages ago to cover round 19, he's not playing anymore for Manly, and Grant's obviously out for this week. And the problem is that I can't really use them for a loop either, because Melbourne lock out game 1 and then Manly lock out game 2. So I don't really have an option to use them for a VC loop. It's a bit of a low upside trading at hooker, but the reason I had saved some trades was that I kind of thought that I would need it at hooker in round 26 or round 27, and that's obviously come to fruition. So I probably will sell, and I don't really have enough money to sell Simpkin to a cheapo, so I'll probably just sell Harry Grant and get in a Reece Robson, and just hope that next week, who do Melbourne play in round 27? Melbourne playing the Broncos. Oh god, at Suncorp. Grant could go well there. I just have to hope that Robson in 2 games can outscore Grant in the 1 game next week. So at the moment, trade that I'm considering is Harry Grant to Reece Robson, because that frees me enough money to go Casey McLean up to Lomax, who I'm very, very keen on this week. So if I just quickly sort by that, and that leaves me 45k in the bank. Other options I did consider was that instead of going Grant to Robson, I could go Grant to Little and maybe go like a Galvin to Nico Hines. But I think I'm more keen on Lomax this week than I am Nico, just because of that whole thing I mentioned around, with Braden Trindle, I don't think Hines was as good as what we would have hoped. Whereas Lomax, I feel very confident in, I think, having a good game this week. And I'm very happy to play Marzu this week. Very happy to play Kale Iro this week, as I am Val Holmes and Dom Young. I have seen a couple of people asking about sitting the likes of Garrick against Bulldogs. To be honest, I think the fact that he's goal kicking and the fact that Crichton's out on his edge, I think Garrick, for me, I'll still play. Even Carraz, I was kind of like playing at centre. I feel like his upside might be a little bit capped, but he's so good though. And the Bulldogs are good as well. It feels difficult to not play Carraz. But let's assume that I do these 2 trades. I will have to make one, and this leaves me with 1 trade in the bank and only 45k. So I probably don't have much flexibility next week, but at least I've got 1 trade as cover. So I guess my dilemma this week would be, I'd absolutely be playing Lomax, and I'll probably play Lomax in terms of ordering ahead of Dom Young. I guess the question is, do I drop one of my centre wings, and there'd probably be one of Carraz or Garrick, or do I not play Oluquatu against the Bulldogs and just play 4 reserves of Ponga, Marzu, Dom Young and Iro? Because I think I'm pretty, as I said, centre wings, I'm locked in, I think, to playing Val. I'm locked into playing Val, Lomax, Dom Young, Iro and Marzu. That's 5 already. I think I only have space for one more reserve because I think I need to play. Obviously, I need to play Ponga. I definitely need to play Angus. For me, it's a question of I'll need to drop one out of Olaquatu, Kiraz, and Garrick, which doesn't feel great, but that's kind of where I'm at the moment. If I had to pick one, I think it might be Olaquatu, because I know last week was a little bit better, but he's been a little bit quieter in the last few weeks, so potentially that. So I could just be playing all my reserves in the backs, through all 7 center wings, and then my 2 fullbacks, which maybe is not the worst thing in the world. But yeah, that could be very realistically be my setup for this week. If I VC Lomax, he plays on Saturday 3 o'clock. So I don't really have much of an option to use for a loop, unless what I did, the only way I would be able to do it would be to sub in Samuel Lafinu for Tarpany, put the reserve on Tarpany, and I'd probably have to take the reserve then off. Iro, Iro or Mazu, which doesn't feel great. So I might not be able to get away. It might be difficult to do a VC loophole this week that I can actually use. So, because the problem is that Bulldogs and Manly play earlier in the round against each other, and that's kind of where I'm making my decision on who to sit. So, one to ponder. It could be Luai, could be Lomax, or maybe I just stick with Val, who plays the very first game of the round. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my team at the moment. That leaves me with one trade. Definitely, I think, getting in Lomax for this week. And Reece Robson, he's not a very sexy pick, but he's kind of safe and steady, and he'll do a job for me for the next 2 weeks. All right, so that's kind of, I guess, it that I wanted to cover. Let's see if you guys have any questions, let me know. We'll start tackling them for the next few minutes, and then otherwise I think we'll wrap up the stream there. Ian, I'll have to look at your email after the stream. I won't be able to look at it just now, mate. Apologies. What have we got here? VC Turbo, Free Loop, Young, Kiraz, or Mazu? Not fully understanding the question there, Aaron. I guess, are you asking of who to play out of Young, Kiraz, or Mazu? Kind of a similar decision to me. It sounds bad, but it sounds like Kiraz might be the one to sit. I don't know. My trades look like Curran to Tarpany and Brian To'o to Lomax. Look, I love Lomax, but I don't think I'd be selling Brian To'o this week against the Rabbitohs. I have one trade left in my head-to-head final. Only have 16 players. I hate Bellamy. Shout out to you, Luke. Apologies. Condolences for that. Want to get Lomax, but who to trade out of Val, Mazu, To'o, Iro, Garrick? It's really difficult with these kind of questions because you're at the point in the season where you're trading out like really good players. God, if I had to trade one of them out. To be honest, like I know the other guy, what's his name? Who said it? Sorry, I missed it now. Someone was asking about trading To'o to Lomax. Like, I don't like the idea of trading out To'o when he's got the Rabbitohs and then the Titans in the next couple of weeks. But like, he has been very quiet in the last few rounds. Oh God. I say quiet, 47-32, but he had 109-68 before that. Oh God, who would I trade out of any of those guys? I think Iro is just playing too well, and good matchup this week as well. If you're purely looking at this week, it had to be a thing in my it could be Mazu, because Mazu, whilst Braddon Best is really good, like Val and Garrick are both goal kickers. To'o's got the best 2 matchups in my opinion. Iro's just been killing it. I guess the other thing that, Swift AU is suggesting that To'o could get a rest around 27. I think that would probably have to be the deal breaker. If you think To'o is going to get a rest around 27, then he's probably the one I think who has to make way. But God, that's a tough decision. If it wasn't To'o, I think it probably... Would it be Mazu? He's got 2 really good matchups. Maybe it's Garrick. It could be Garrick. Garrick's been a little bit quiet. Like, Garrick has been solid, but he's getting like 60s. He's not getting his big 80s, 90s. And I think his work rate has dropped off a little bit in the last few rounds as well. yeah, like the last 3 rounds, 61, 61, 62. If he's just going to get you 61, like Marzu is a 40, but he could also be a 90. Bulldogs is a tough matchup, and then it's the Sharks next week. Yeah, look, it doesn't sound great, but it could be Garrick, to be honest. Thoughts on both Fermor, Pod, and good 3-round average. Decent matchup as well. Yeah, Fermor's actually been just like an unsung hero for people all season long. So, way back at the start of the season, can you remember when we all had these 400k second rowers in our teams in round 1? You had Bo Fermor, you had Pia Kura, you had Sean Bloor was another one. Sean Lane was another one. Like, we had a lot of these guys. Angus Crichton was a 400k second row at the start of the season. Bo Fermor was one, and he's probably turned out to be one of the best. He's got a season average of 60. Very good in the last few rounds as well. He has got attacking potential in him. I actually don't mind him as a bit of a shout in your second row. Playing Knights, I think that's a pretty good matchup as well. Last reserve, Duncan or Hands. So I know Hands scored 47 last week. I'm just going to have a quick look at what Tallis Duncan scored. My immediate thought was maybe Brendan Hands. He scored 64 last week, to be fair, Tallis Duncan. He did play... he's played the full 80 the last 2 weeks for 64, 65. I think I'd actually probably go Tallis Duncan if he's playing the full 80 minutes, which looks like he has the last couple of weeks. Like, to be fair, so I'm looking from round 20 onwards. In his 4 80-minute games, he scored 56, 85, 65, 64. That's pretty solid. Brendan Hands is always a risk of maybe getting a low one. So, to be honest, I'd actually probably go Tallis Duncan, even though it's against Penrith. One trade left in, get either Tupou, Little, Watson, or Lomax. I think I've been so high on in the stream. I think for me, it'd have to be Lomax. All right, guys, we're probably going to wrap up the stream there. Got through a fair few things, but hopefully you all got some value out of it. Thank God for the internet holding up this entire time as well, which I'm very happy about. But thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you all probably next week, Tuesday, for the final Tuesday stream. We'll see if next Sunday we can do a wrap up of the season, lessons learned, see where we finish up in the rankings and stuff. But obviously not much longer to go. So appreciate all of you for tuning in all season long. Do give the stream a like on the way out if you did enjoy it as well. And it's probably a bit late in the season as well, but if you're watching and you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing as well. Otherwise, we'll catch you all later on. Any other questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you all in the next one. Cheers and have a good rest of your evening.